last time we were in the middle of talking about Columbus and his journey. We had, saw how he had gone across the Atlantic Ocean and landed in what he apparently perceived was the East. He thought he had landed in Asia, and originally said we need to treat the natives well because we want to win them over to Christianity with love, not force. But then he noticed something. What did he notice among the natives?
Gold.
Gold, yeah. And that seemed to change his perspective a little bit. So the captive interpreters that they had told the Spanish sailors about an island called Babaque, or Babec, where nuggets of gold were found on the beaches. Well, that sounds pretty enticing. So gold fever caused the Pinta, one of the three ships, to actually sail away from the others in search of this island, and which went off on their own. 2 weeks later, Columbus attempted to follow, but was blown by a storm to a beautiful island that the Spaniards called Espanola. Anybody know where that is? You ever heard of Espanola? It's right there. Hispaniola is spelled a little differently there. And there are two nations on that island today. Anybody know what nations those are?
Puerto Rico.
No. I'm not sure where it is on this map, but no, it's Puerto Rico is its own island. Just one of them. The Dominican Republic on this side, and what's on this side of the island? Haiti, right. Haiti is very poor. Dominican Republic is not so bad because of the weather. The weather that comes from the west, and it does not rain on Haiti, and then it goes up over the mountains that divide the island, and then it rains on this side. So Dominican Republic gets most of the rain. Haiti is extremely poor, probably the poorest nation in the world. At least it has been most of the time in the last century. All right, so they found this island, as you can see from the map there. 20 days later, on Christmas morning, everyone on the Santa Maria was asleep, being Christmas, when the ship was wafted closer to shore by an unnoticed swell of water. Water took it in closer to shore. And then the rudder struck bottom, and before the ship could be saved, it was torn open by the land, by the rocks. Well, that disaster actually turned out to be a blessing, because the people who lived on the island helped the sailors offload the Santa Maria, stored their goods for them in their own houses, and posted guards to make sure that no one touched anything. In addition, these natives possessed masks of gold and bracelets, necklaces, and rings. Giving thanks to God for allowing the shipwreck and depositing them at that location, Columbus set about to establish a settlement there, naming it La Navidad, which means what? Yeah, that's the word used for Christmas. It actually means the birth. The groundwork was laid for a fort, complete with moat and tower, and 39 men gladly volunteered to remain. Columbus wrote, "They have arms, military, and provisions for more than a year. In fact, the men that I've left there would be enough to destroy the whole land, and the island holds no dangers for them as long as they maintain discipline." Columbus shows some insight here. He was hopeful that by trading with the Indians, that the source of gold could be discovered, and thereby the resources to finance the crusade to finally free the Holy Land from the grip of the Muslims. That was part of the reason for wanting gold. They wanted to be able to go and free the Holy Land from the control of the Muslims, and that took money. And so he actually writes that to the king and queen of Spain. Well, Columbus had 38 men left, and they got on board the Nina. Remember, the Santa Maria is not useful anymore. The Pinta went off on its own. They don't know where that is. So the Nina is the only ship that got left. So he and 38 men got on the Nina to head home. 3 days out into the ocean, they're heading back, and what do they see? They saw the Pinta. It was going home too. They just happened to meet up out there in the ocean. And Columbus was very angry because they had just left. But he finally accepted the captain's excuses. A historian who was on board, Las Casas, he writes a lot, says this: the admiral does not know the reasons for his shameless and disloyal conduct, but the admiral, talking about Columbus, was ready to forget it so that he should not help Satan in his evil design to do all he could to hinder the voyage, as indeed he had done up to that time. All right, so for 3/4 of the way home, they were able to thank God for the great weather, especially since the ships were leaking. Then on the night of February 12th, the worst storm that any of them ever experienced began. The huge waves came crashing down on them from both sides simultaneously, leaving them no choice but to let the storm take them where it would. They couldn't control the ships. The Nina eventually lost sight of the Pinta. The awful storm seemed intent on destroying the small band returning to Spain, as well as those they left behind. Because remember, they were going to Spain, but they're going to come back for these guys that they left to colonize. Prayer seemed to bring no relief. Reminds me of the guys on board ship with Jonah. Remember how they all started praying to their gods? Well, they're praying to God, but it's not bringing any relief. Was God trying to get Columbus's attention, like God was trying to get Jonah's attention? To get his mind off the gold and back to him? His journal records that he knew God had a reason for allowing the violence of the storm, but in his mounting frustration, rather than repenting, Columbus tried to maneuver his way out of disaster. He suggested to the crew attempting to appease God by offering a sacrifice in the form of a solemn vow. He said, let's determine that somebody will make a vow that when we get back, if God saves us, that when we get back, they'll make a pilgrimage to some holy site. And that will maybe cause God to quit being angry with us and take away the storm. So they put beans in a hat, and they had one bean marked with a cross. And each one drew out the bean to see which one would be the one to fulfill the vow. Columbus picked the one that was marked. The storm did not abate. So they proposed another pilgrimage. And this time, another person drew the selected bean, but still there was no change. They decided, well, let's try a third time, a third pilgrimage. Maybe 3 of us going on a pilgrimage will satisfy God. And once again, Columbus drew the bean. Now, out of all the men on board, what are the odds that one person would draw the bean 2 out of 3 times? Now, they're pretty high. Finally, the whole crew cried out for mercy, promising the Blessed Virgin Mary that if she would pray for them, they would go barefoot and in shirt sleeves to the nearest chapel dedicated to her and there say a solemn mass. Still, there was no change. Finally, at the end of the next day, nearly a week since it had begun, the storm gradually subsided and a sliver of land appeared on the horizon. They had arrived in Portugal's Azores. The Azores here were owned by Portugal. Now, Portugal is an enemy of Spain, and in fact, Henry the Navigator, the ruler of Portugal, had sent out word, because he knew about Columbus going, he had sent out word that if Columbus ever came into his territories, that he was to be captured. So they landed in Portugal's territory. The commander of the island, acting on orders from the King of Portugal, attempted to capture Columbus and his men, but Columbus was able to outmaneuver him and then set his course for Spain. However, as they departed the Azores, another monstrous winter storm struck them, tearing off their sails and driving them northeast for 5 straight days. Once again, they prayed, vowed another pilgrimage, and drew lots. It's the 4th time they've drawn lots, right? Drawn a bean out. 2 out of the 3 times before, Columbus drew the bean. This 4th time, Columbus once again picked the marked bean. The odds are 60,880 to 1 that he would pick the bean 3 out of 4 times. Was God trying to get his attention? It certainly looks that way. Because just like Jonah on that ship, when they drew lots to see whose fault it was that they had the storm and it came to Jonah, they didn't have to do it 3 more times. They knew right away that Jonah was the one. Columbus should have learned from that. Well, the storm got worse, and it brought them on the 6th day to the coast of Portugal. The last place Columbus would have sought refuge from the storm. But the storm grew even more intense, and it took them to the rocky coast where they would be dashed to pieces. There was no way any of them would survive. The only chance they had was to make it to the mouth of the river of Lisbon, but they didn't have any sails. So how are they going to maneuver without sails? So they decided to turn the ship broadside so the wind would hit the side of the ship. Now that's pretty dangerous, because if you're broadside, what could happen to your ship very easily? It'd tip right over. But that was the only chance they had to get inshore. Well, the whole ship groaned and heeled over so far that the sea began to comb over her gunwales. The men screamed. It looked as if she was about to go all the way over. But she held, it slowly straightened, and a giant wave lifted her and fairly hurled her into the river's mouth. Well, when word reached the king of Portugal that Columbus had been thrown into the mouth of the river of Lisbon, he invited Columbus to come see him. And of course, and that was all under the guise of being friendly, but trying to find out what he had discovered. And some Indians were with Columbus, and so the king, it's actually King John II at this point, not Henry. King John asked the Indians. He gave them some beans, and he said, "Show me what your islands look like, or where are they, or whatever." And so he was trying to get from them, about where it was and how to get there. And after he heard about all the wealth that was there, but the beans were scattered before he got a chance to get a good look at them. So Columbus was able to get away from him and eventually get back to the king and queen of Spain. But he demanded a lot of things as he got back. He demanded money. His preoccupation with gold was becoming an obsession. Having reported his discovery to Spain, he was given a gift of quite a bit of money, but he also wanted the money that was supposed to be paid to the first one that sighted land. It wasn't him, but he claimed that money too. Took a little effort to get another fleet of ships to go back, and this time he had 17 vessels and 1,200 men for a return voyage. Queen Isabella also had a suggestion. She said, "Why don't you take some pigs this time, along with some dogs and horses?" And that's how those animals got introduced to the New World. Although there's some evidence that the Chinese may have brought some horses back in 1421. Well, Columbus arrived back at La Navidad. And he was shocked. Remember, that's where he left the soldiers, the sailors, to start a colony. He was shocked to find that all of his men were dead. How did that happen? Well, some of them killed one another. Some were killed by another Indian tribe, other than the ones who had befriended them. Just after the Niña had departed, the men started indulging their lust for the Indian women. Not content with even one woman apiece, they gathered as many women as they could get. They also began seizing gold from the Indians instead of bartering for it. Quarrels among themselves led to murder and easy ambushing by unfriendly Indians. And so they were all dead. Their lust, their greed had led to their deaths. Unfortunately, Columbus and the other Europeans would follow after them and didn't learn anything from this tragedy. They perpetuated a policy of rape, murder, and slavery in order to obtain their objective of wealth. Demands of food, gold, spun cotton, and sex with their women were made of the Indians. Columbus even rewarded his lieutenants with a native woman to rape. He wrote a friend in 1500, 100 castellanos are as easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers that go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand. To serve as an example, when an Indian committed even a minor offense, Columbus would have his ears or nose cut off. Since violence, provocation, and injustice from the Christians never ceased, Las Casas wrote, some fled to the mountains, and others began to slay Christians in return for all the wrongs and the torture they had suffered, and who could blame them? When that happened, vengeance was immediately taken. The Christians called into punishment, yet not the guilty alone, but all who lived in a village or district were sentenced to execution or torture. So writes Las Casas. In 2 years, 100,000 of the approximately 300,000 natives on Hispaniola had died or been killed, a third of the population. 8 years later, that figure had more than doubled. And 4 years after that, there were only 20,000 left. 8 million Haitians were reduced by 1496 to 1.1 million. By 1516, thanks also to the slave trade, only some 12,000 remained out of 8 million. By 1542, fewer than 200 were alive. And by 1555, they were all gone. Columbus not only sent the first slaves across the Atlantic, he probably sent more slaves, about 5,000, than any other individual. Things got so far out of hand that the Spanish monarchs finally sent an acting governor to Hispaniola to take over. When Columbus refused the king and queen's authority, he was arrested and sent back to Spain. In Spain, Columbus became an increasing embarrassment, even being mocked as the admiral, not of the seas, but of the mosquitoes. So after a year, he was allowed to go exploring once again with 4 ships. The only stipulation was this: you're not allowed to go back to Hispaniola. It caused so much trouble there, you're not allowed to go back. Which is exactly the first place he went. He was refused entrance at the harbor. He then sailed to Cuba, then went for Honduras on the mainland. Following the coast, he finally found the source of gold in Costa Rica. The Indians took his men to gold fields where the mineral was right on the surface. This sparked the entrance of thousands of conquistadors into America in the bloodiest rape of a country the world has ever known, and all for the love of gold. Meanwhile, Columbus's health was ruined, his sanity was nearly gone, and he found himself stranded for months. He struggled against tempests and storms, delusionary thinking, and Indian attack. He pleaded for deliverance, yet did not realize that he needed to repent. He made it back to Spain, but not to the acclaim he desired. He thought he'd be welcome as a hero. He spent 2 years fretting about not receiving his proper share of the Indies gold, which had finally begun to arrive in some quantity. On Ascension Day, that's a day to celebrate Christ's Ascension, 1506, after receiving the sacraments of the church, Christopher Columbus said these words: "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Same thing that Jesus had said. And went to be forever with the Savior whose name he bore, but unfortunately whose name he tarnished by his actions in seeking gold instead of God. Well, as we've seen, there were many other people that had been to America before Columbus, and so his voyage was not important because he was the first to discover the American continent, but because of how Europe responded. This was due to changing conditions in Europe. You see, before this time, even though Europeans may have known about this other continent, nothing was in the right state for anybody to go there. But now, because of certain conditions, European society was ready to explore and to settle this new continent. The The things that contributed to the colonization and exploitation were several. Do I have those in your notes? The elements of European society that contributed to the colonization and exploitation of the new continent. You see it there? Okay. I'll just run through them, just give you an idea of what they were. You don't have to write them down. There was an increase in international trade and commerce. So people were interested in trade, so they wanted to go this new direction. There were nations had risen under monarchies, so there was money in nations as kings and wanted to control different areas. There were advancements in military technology. There are new forms of social technology. There was bookkeeping, mechanical printing. All those kind of things contributed to the ability of nations to send out explorers. There was a lot of wealth that came to people, and so they were looking for more. Columbus said, "Gold is most excellent. Gold constitutes treasure, and he who has it does all he wants in the world, and can even lift souls up to paradise." Because the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church was that you can contribute money toward people getting out of purgatory, and so gold could be used for that as well. The nature of European Christians was such that they were able to move, that they had not been able to move from place to place before, and to try to carry the gospel to other places. Typically, when Spaniards encountered a new tribe of Indians, they would read aloud in Spanish to them what came to be called the requirement, as if they could understand. Here's what they read: "I implore you to recognize the church as a lady, and in the name of the Pope, take the king as Lord of this land and obey his mandates. If you do not do it, I tell you that with the help of God, I will enter powerfully against you all. I will make war everywhere and every way that I can. I will subject you to the yoke and obedience to the church and to his majesty. I will take your women and children and make them slaves. The deaths and injuries that you will receive from here on will be your own fault, and not that of his majesty nor of the gentlemen that accompany me." Well, I think that beats any kind of witnessing method we might come up with, huh? Just threaten people with slavery and death if they don't convert. Is that a good idea? You're saying yes? How misguided can you be? How far from Columbus's first words, "Let's win them with love rather than force"? No one remembered that. Well, I think next in your notes you do have a part that you have filled in about different European explorers. So let's look at that. The first one you should have had was Amerigo Vespucci. Do you have that in your notes, Amerigo Vespucci? Did you not get that from your notes? I mean, from your book when you're taking notes? Yes? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are frantically writing. What did Amerigo Vespucci, what was his contribution? What do you have for that? Stephen, what do you have for his contribution?
So he made 2 voyages.
Okay, that tells what he did. That's not a contribution, though. What's his contribution? Nate?
Discovered South America.
Okay, that's partly what he did. What did he do in South America? What was his purpose in South America? He was drawing a map. And how did that contribute to Europeans' perceptions of America? Supposedly, what had Columbus thought about what he had discovered? He thought it was the Indies. There's some speculation as to whether he really thought that or even how long, but that was initially what the news was coming back to Europe that this was a shorter route to get to the Indies. But Amerigo Vespucci, by his map making, discovered that this was not the Indies, but this was a new world. His contribution was that he realized that America was a new world. And then his name was given to it, rather than Columbus, called America. Okay, that's Amerigo Vespucci. Who's the next explorer you have? Spanish explorer. Steph, who do you have?
I have Ferdinand Magellan.
Right. And what contribution did Magellan make? Caleb? Okay, that is almost correct. There's something not exactly correct about what Caleb said. What was it? Okay, the circumnavigation of the globe, which means all the way around on water.
He died before.
He didn't actually make the trip, right? He died in the Philippines. He was over here in the Philippines and got involved in a war there between some tribes and was killed. But his ship made it all the way around. Which maybe, well, so what did that prove? What did that show?
She wouldn't fall off if you didn't find her.
But did anybody really believe they would fall off? That's what you've been told, isn't it? That Magellan proved the earth was round, right? How many were told that? That's absolutely false. I don't know where these ideas come from, but that's wrong. No one believed that the earth was flat, no one of any consequence. They knew it was round. So what did Magellan's voyage prove? It proved two things. One, that you could go all the way around the world in water. You could sail all the way around. The second thing it proved was that Columbus was wrong. The earth is a lot bigger than what he thought. And the scientists who were opposed to Columbus were right. So two things, that you can go all the way around on water, and secondly, that the earth is a tremendously large planet. Okay, you got that? Destroy the myth. Okay, next we go to English exploration. And who do we have for the English explorer? Who do you have, Megan?
John.
Right, John Cabot. Was John Cabot English? I heard a no. What was he? You know?
Italian.
Italian, right. So you find this a lot. People sailing for other countries. He was Italian, but he's sailing for England. And what was his contribution? Brady?
He reached Newfoundland.
Right. So he's sailing for England, and he reached Newfoundland. Is what we call it, Newfoundland. And what importance was that? People have been to Newfoundland before. Fishermen were fishing off the shores before. So of what importance was the fact that Giovanni Cabotti went to Newfoundland in an English ship? It provided England with a claim in North America. Because he landed on this one island out here, England could claim that they owned North America. Of course, the Spanish also claimed they owned North America. Eventually the French would too. But that gave them a reason to claim North America for England. Now, some of what's important for the settlement of America goes back to the Reformation and Martin Luther. So let's take a few minutes to examine that. Number one, the German monk who rebelled against the Roman Catholic Church was who? Everybody say it together? Yeah, okay. Martin Luther. Easy because I just told you that, right? Secondly, the movement that rediscovered biblical truth and shattered the religious monopoly of Rome was called what? Protestant Reformation, good. Sure you have that down? Next, the social force was that which challenged Rome's educational and cultural monopoly with a broader worldview. It was the discovery of many things. It was the enlightenment of Europe. What was that called? The Renaissance. Next, the political force. The nationalism, nationalism is the next one, brought stronger kings, making the Pope less relevant. So the Roman Catholic Church was losing some of its power as kings became more and more powerful in their countries because people were proud of the nation in which they lived, the people with whom they lived. And then next one, the technological force that provided the means for the rapid dissemination of Reformation ideas and the mass distribution of the Bible into the vernacular languages of Europe was what?
Type printing.
What kind of type printing? Close. Movable type printing. There had been printing before, but you had to make the whole page of words and print that and then destroy it. You couldn't use them again. But now Gutenberg invented movable type printing so that you could put letters together and print a page and then take those letters out and reuse them. And that was a huge advancement. It was a lot less expensive to print that way. All right, so all those things contributed as well as the next one, and that is the spiritual force. The spiritual force was what?
Spiritual hunger.
Spiritual hunger from neglect and abuse from Rome. The Roman Catholic Church was neglecting the spiritual lives of people throughout Europe and seemed themselves to only be interested in gold. And so there was a spiritual hunger among the people. Okay, let's go to the beliefs of the reformers. If you took world history, you should be able to supply these. I think we looked at about 5 before, but there are 3 major ones that we'll look at here that your book talks about. So the first belief of the reformers was in the absolute authority of what? Everybody say it together. Scripture, which is called sola scriptura. Next, they believed in the priesthood of all believers, so that you didn't have to go to a particular priest in order to reach God. You can go to God yourself through Jesus Christ. And then thirdly, salvation through faith alone, apart from works, which is called sola fides. Faith alone. It wasn't through works that you get to God, it's through faith alone. All right, the next point, the causes of religious wars. Religious wars resulted from the Reformation. Why? First of all, because of the connection of state and church. Because whatever the ruler was, that's what the whole country was. That created conflicts between different countries. Secondly, there was a lack of religious toleration. So if you were a Roman Catholic, it wasn't okay that somebody else was a Protestant, and vice versa. If you were a Lutheran, it wasn't okay that somebody was an Anabaptist. And so people fought against each other over those religious grounds. And then thirdly, the cause of religious wars was simply the political ambitions of whom? Kings of Europe, right. Now, why is all that important? And that brings us to the 5th point, and that is the influence of religious wars. The influence of religious wars was that it caused what? Everybody say it together. Immigration to America as a refuge from persecution. We're going to see many, many times that people are going to come to America to get away from the religious wars, to get away from the persecution that they were experiencing from other groups. So all of this works together to bring people to America. If the Reformation had not happened, we would not have had people coming to America to settle in any great numbers. There would have been a little reason to do so. There were some other reasons as well, but the large push for people to come to America initially is for religious freedom and to escape the wars of Europe. All right, that brings us to the end of that part of our notes. We will look at the section called In the Wilderness, beginning with the Spanish century tomorrow. In preparation for that, I want you to read, no, I'm sorry, that'll be for the next, no, let's do this. I got a little further than I thought I would today. So for tomorrow, let's read pages 9 through 16 and fill in the notes on your notes, pages 3 to 5. Read pages 9 through 16. Now, when you get to section C, look at that. That is a chart. It's on page 5 of your notes. That is a chart that I think I have written some explanatory things out to the side. Maybe the original words were not real clear. So look at the explanations that are written there and see if you can fill in that chart under each of the nations that we're exploring. Okay? Let's complete that for tomorrow. You're dismissed.